Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I was really impressed with Wes Huff as well. He's like, I could speak to this a little bit, but I have friends over here who are way better at this than me. Here's what they've said. So stay in your lane. If you don't know, then find friends who can help you with that, right? Yeah, and I think as far as some advice I would give, there are some things I would say to young apologists. Be careful. Don't speak on things that you really don't know about.
Well, too late for us. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the I'm Telling God About This podcast. Today we have a very special guest, one of my professors from my MDiv, Dr. Ronnie Campbell. Welcome to the show. Thank you for spending time with us to, talk about some of the cool things that's going on in apologetics. Why don't you tell everybody who you are, what you do, and we can go ahead and start our conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Josh. And Josh, I'm glad to be here. This is a pretty exciting thing. I love what you guys are doing and the focus of the show and everything. So I teach at Liberty University. I've been a professor, since 2006. I started teaching online there and came on full-time 2017 as a professor of theology. Now I'm full professor of theology and apologetics. And so my primary area of study is not apologetics, believe it or not. It's more philosophical theology. So the doctrine of God is my main area of study. Anything related to God's relationship to time, the doctrine of immutability, aseity, doctrine of Trinity. Those are the kinds of things that really jazz me and I really like to study. So if I can teach on those subjects, I get giddy. So it's great.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Awesome. So a lot has been going on in pop culture and podcasts and, YouTube and media in general with Christian apologetics, Christianity. There's a lot of things going on. Specifically, what has happened recently is the Wes Huff and Joe Rogan podcast, obviously. If you haven't listened to our last episode, audience, just go back, listen to our last episode. We give you kind of a background of what happened with Billy Carson and how that all happened. But I wanted to kind of ask from an apologist standpoint, did you get a chance to listen to some of that interview or see some of the feedback that was happening? What did you think of that?
Yeah, so I did finally, but I watched them in kind of reverse order. I started off looking at little YouTube clips. I'm like, oh, this is cool. Wow, okay, great. Yeah. And then I watched the Joe Rogan and the Billy Carson. Well, I didn't say watch it. I was listening to it in the car, so it was very chopped up. But I did get through the whole discussion and thought, this is fantastic, so I need to go back and watch the debate. Went back and watched the debate, and I was just really impressed with Wes Huff. What a great apologist. What a really classy guy, too.
Yeah.
And I was very impressed with that. Then I watched a few critiques. I watched Alex O'Connor critique, and then Gavin Ortland follow up, and then I saw Wes Huff critiques Wes Huff.
That was
I loved that.
yeah. This is really good. I'm glad.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that part before we jump back in, but I don't want to miss that. Like, the Wes Huff critiques Wes Huff. I get this all the time. And maybe you can even share your thoughts about this being like an academic, but as a pastor, at least, and some people will say this, like, why go on podcast? Well, I have a podcast. Everybody has a podcast. Like, there's that fear of, am I going to say something and people are going to, get on my case about, is this going to, tarnish my credibility? And man, I was so happy to see Wes Huff, who is clearly a professional scholar, who is a great communicator, who's clearly, a good faith guy, get up and not take himself so seriously, to not just address it, but hey, let me go back through and point out all the mistakes that I made and the ones that you point out. And I feel like maybe it's just cancel culture in general that did that. But, how much more do we advance the needle on discussion when, we don't take ourselves so seriously that we can't be afraid to make a mistake and just simply issue a, hey, okay, like in the form of a conversation that lasted like 4 hours. Yeah, I got a couple numbers twisted because
Right.
I'm a human, you know? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, okay, this is something that Gavin Ortland pointed out, and I think is absolutely. See, I love this kind of thing. We're sitting back, relaxed. But if I were in a formal conversation or debate, man, I get tripped up on my words all the time.
Yeah.
You know, even in the classroom, I'll say things and I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not what I meant to say. And it's, it happens all the time. And you think, goodness gracious, the amount of scrutiny that people give you today. But I loved his little video, his little short of him critiquing himself, and he's like, the first part was pretty humorous because like, no, that's not it. It was 500, not 400, and he's doing all that.
Right.
I thought that was good, and it demonstrates, I think, a bit of classiness in the work of apologetics, because he was able to go back and say, look, this is really what was going through my mind. If you're having a conversation for 3 hours, okay, so we can critique that all day long. But unless you've been in that kind of environment and done it, I teach Monday only classes sometimes at Liberty, and sometimes I have 2 back-to-back 2.5-hour classes. So I'm teaching from 3:30 to 6. I take a break, and then I'm back at 7, and I'm teaching 9 to 9:30. And I do a lot of lecturing in these 2 classes, and I can tell you, by the end of that, my mind is much
fried.
And so, I would say things and I'm like, I don't have to apologize to the class. I'm like, I don't even know where this came from. And, it's just a laugh. But really, the kind of pressure that something like that brings, I couldn't imagine. And just think, but you're on Joe Rogan. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
There's no
Billions.
script. It's just
no script,
raw.
No questions ahead of time.
And
raw.
I think one of the interesting things to focus in on here is the way that Wes Huff responded to his own criticism of what he was saying versus what Billy Carson did. Billy Carson went on and defended everything and attacked everybody, and did not take the humble approach to say, okay, I got this wrong or I got this wrong. Now, granted, mostly because he was just flat out wrong about what he's been saying for years. And so there's a certain level where you can say, yeah, I made that up. And you can't really just come clean on that, right?
No.
You just kind of, I'm going to give up everything and say it.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Josh. Don't miss that either. That's one of the cool things about apologetics, and I think about the gospel, and I think this is what my point is we need more smart people who take themselves seriously to take the risk of being engaged in good faith, public, authentic conversations, because the cool thing is the truth doesn't fear a challenge. Wes didn't have to worry about going back and issuing a retraction because nothing that he said was going to undermine the veracity of the claims that he was making to Joe, right? Whereas Billy Carson, his whole house is built on a very meticulously crafted, piece of scaffolding where he needs everything to line up just so for it to be remotely plausible. So yeah, you have to admit nothing, make counter accusations, deny everything and make counter accusations, but Wes can get up and be hey, we don't have to stress that, right?
Exactly. And Billy Carson made a house of cards, and it didn't take anything to dismantle it, right? Yeah. So it's interesting. But Dr. Campbell, on this, so in the interview, some of the things that, I don't know if you've watched a whole lot of Joe Rogan. I thought what was interesting is just the shift and the progression of intellectual honesty that Joe Rogan has come from. I mean, there's clips from 2018, 2019 of him saying that, it's the Bible is so stupid, it's just made up, it's all a myth. Ironically, here's an interesting point that I noticed is there's a clip of him saying that the Bible is not reliable, it's stupid, it doesn't make any sense. And he's wearing that black shirt with the yellow tiger, the very same shirt that he wore with Wes Huff. I'm wondering if that was a personal marketer, be yeah, this is what I was. Now I want to redeem this shirt, this clip to say, okay, but it's interesting how the progression of where he's come from, who he's talked to, the not even real I would say Christian apologists or even real Christians. There was a couple of people that came on that said I believe in Jesus, and they weren't able to fully defend it, but like, what do you, from what you've seen of Joe Rogan, if you have at all, like, what do you think about that process, about those little nuggets, over time, the small seeds?
I don't watch like his 3-hour podcast. I've seen a number of the little shorts on YouTube. Sometimes I'll watch like a 15-minute clip or whatever they have, available. And I've seen some really interesting ones. And I've seen some of those same things that you pointed out, like just a bit of an antagonistic approach to Christianity, and how he's kind of softened and warmed up to the possibility that, hey, there's more to this life. I mean, even what he was saying about atheism and how, his critique of atheism, or atheists, I should say, there's got to be something more. And, it seems like to me, I like I said, I hadn't watched a lot of these podcasts, but he's open to the idea of seeding and things like that with aliens.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you do see growth. And I think first, like having people like Stephen Myers on there. Now, I did watch bit of that one, and seeing with Wes Huff, you see this transition in him, and I think he's seeing people. You see him interviewing people that he respects, and you're like, oh wait, they have a completely different perspective on this than I do, and so I think that's kind of brought him to a place. I mean, and if you imagine the number of people that he's interviewing, after a while, you're probably going to be shifting a lot in your ideas and thoughts. And so I think it's great that just to see him moving in this direction.
That's great. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's actually something I wanted to ask you about. And I think it's a really good comparison. When you look at the interview with Stephen Meyer and the approach, right? Like what I'm curious what your thoughts are on these, like the generational differences, but also between Christian apologists and approaches to it, but also like the difference between like the academic and the professional communicator, because I feel like we've got two kind of schools here. And I mean, I think we see this in seminary, and if you're new to the channel and you're listening, like Josh and I both went to Liberty for MDivs. I was an undergrad there back in the old days with the Way of the Master and all that good stuff, many moons ago.
Here's $20. Get saved.
If you go back and listen to our previous episodes for my commentary on that. But I'm curious, what your thoughts and what you're seeing, because you look at a guy like Wes, 33, an academic for sure. We joke that he was like the genetic, created in a lab by Gary Habermas, and who was the other
Lee
one?
Strobel.
And Lee Strobel, and some lab in the basement of
Captain
Divinity
Canada
Tower.
apologist.
Yeah,
yes.
But all that aside,
Captain Britain, right?
That's it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So he's like perfect, right? Like, I mean, and from that side of things, but he's really an anomaly. Not an anomaly, but in the public sphere, an anomaly. But really, you see like two pools. You've got professional academics that have the book knowledge, they understand the arguments, the philosophical, and these people are where? In the seminaries, in the universities, they're writing books.
In the journals.
They're in the journals.
Right, they're presenting
they're addressing
ETS,
these things,
all that
right?
stuff.
And then you've got all of these Christian channels that, like, if you Googled or you came across our video, you probably have 50 of them in your feed as well. Who are some of these? Like, what's that one YouTube channel, Josh, the other guy that's really popular?
Ruslan?
Yeah, Ruslan, like guys like this, where, these are solid Christians. They may be pastors, they may not be pastors, but they're taking discipleship and ministry seriously, and so they've dedicated themselves to like personal study and whatnot, but they don't have that same depth. Like, how do you see like the intersection of these, and one side moving to the other or whatever? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so let me just say, I think there's a place for all of it. When I look at somebody like what you see, I think, are the strongest apologists are the ones who aren't necessarily apologists. The strongest apologists are people who have really dove into a particular field of study and really invested themselves in it. that's why someone like Wes Huff can just like navigate the textual criticism, the issues and the blurry issues and the Bible so well, because that's his focus, that's his area of study. Gary Habermas, someone who studied the philosophy of history, the philosophy of religion, and so on. I mean, he studied that. I mean, think of Gavin Ortlund. Gavin Ortlund, in some ways he's in that pop apologist category, but in a whole different way. When I say pop apologist, I don't mean that his content is pop, like just easy. He's good, but what I mean is popular. He's a popular apologist, but his field of study is church history, and he's really good. Like when I watched the rebuttal to Alex O'Connor, I thought Gavin did a fantastic job, and he's a good scholar. He has a PhD in I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but I know he did a lot of research in history. But he also has quite a bit of acumen in like philosophy. So Gavin Ortlund is fantastic. And when I would say pop apologist, I didn't mean that in any kind of negative term for him, because he's an not an adequate, but he's a great scholar and a really good guy. He's done some really good scholarly stuff as well. So you look at people like that and Stephen Meyer, they're all people who have, really focused in a field of study and invested themselves in it. And I think that's probably going to be a lot of your difference right there. A lot of your more popular apologists sometimes are good at what they do, but they're going to not be able to deep dive like some of these other guys, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah. Let me let me just follow up real quick, Josh, on that.
Yeah,
go
ahead.
With that, because when it comes to like, and I agree with what you're saying. I'm just thinking about like, say, the scenario of Joe Rogan. What would it be like for Joe Rogan, who's, like he's got his thumb on the pulse of culture, and everything kind of is downstream from culture, right? And if you had somebody like William Lane Craig, who is very intellectual, very methodical, very logical, and he were to go through some of the arguments for the resurrection or for the validity of the Bible or the eyewitness accounts and stuff, I feel like it would be so far over Joe's head that he wouldn't be able to even keep up to it and say like, okay, first of all, you're bringing up all these academic subjects, whereas I think what Josh was kind of pointing at is like being able to be a good communicator is almost more valuable than having all of this head knowledge. And so in some way, and I like what you were saying, is like everybody kind of has an area of focus. And so being able to focus in on one particular thing, but then also just as much put in the work to be a good communicator, might be just as effective.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think that's it, right? Like the way I look at it is there's margins, but the average Christian, if we're doing what we're called to do, and I loved what you said about, it's the people who put in the time to be intentional and to study something and to have that. And Joe Rogan said this. He's like, listen, I knew immediately, because if you ask me something that I'm an expert about, that I know, you could wake me up in the middle of the night and I'm going to move through it, because it's a muscle memory thing. Like, and I'm in the military, and this is what we do. We train to the point of muscle memory. When you do something so many times that you don't really have to think, it doesn't require a lot of cognitive power to move through. And it's the same with preaching. Like, when I prepare for a sermon, I don't spend as much time thinking about, how I'm going to structure the argument or these types of things. I spend my time in the passage. The more I'm familiar with it, the more it's saturated me, the freer I can move with it. Or you think about a pianist. If you're a concert pianist, like, you can play jazz, right? Like that's that, King, Dr. King would love this, but that's that whole Doctrine and the Dances concept, right? That like, you got to know standards before you can do jazz, right? And I look at that and I see, you have to have people who are masters of standards, who put the time into building the structured, stale, boring, but it's every T crossed, it's every I dotted, and it's there. Why? So that the average Christian, well, what do I pray would be the average Christian, can, when they're compelled to prepare themselves and to study and to understand that they have a resource that exists that sets them up for success, and then the passion that they have for whatever that argument that they have, right? And the familiarity that they've built up with it kind of comes out in that more direct and in their zone. And that's where I think, to your point, Wes, perfect. Like, here's a young man, I mean, I'm not a young man, a man in his prime, 33 years old. He's athletic. He's clearly passionate. He's in the knife fight of a PhD, raising a young family. Like, that's the guy you want sitting across from a 60-year-old gorilla with more time and money on his hands than anyone. Like, that's the guy you want, right? And so yeah, I see that. I totally see what each has its place, and we can. And sometimes it's okay for them to kind of stay in their lane, right? Especially those of them that are focusing. At least is that a fair characterization of kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think that was an excellent point. I mean, you see, the ability to communicate to the masses is super important. I think while I can have these conversations, I don't know that I could have gone on the Joe Rogan show.
Right? Yeah.
I could have talked all kinds of fun, but I don't know that I could have done what Wes did there. And I do think you're making a valid point here too. You have someone who has great charisma, someone who's just an overly nice guy, just super nice guy, but also he's critically thinking, he's well read. And he knows how to talk in a way that's, like you said, it's not going to go over somebody's head. And I think that that's one of the things that, and it's just kind of a tendency, I think, of certain philosophers in general. Sometimes they can be like that. They can get into the nitty gritty, getting into those terms, the terminology, and being overly analytic. And when you're talking to a popular audience, the goal is to actually have people come along side you and to follow what you're saying. And I think that's one of the things that Ortland pointed out. And I thought he was right on about this, that when you're talking to a popular audience, you're trying to keep the conversation in such a way that when people hear what you're saying, they can follow with it. You're using all this technical lingo and getting on all these side tracks. It's going to be really difficult to follow that. You have to remember your audience as you're engaging with others. And I think that's so important. I think it's one of the reasons why, Gavin Ortland's such a good communicator. He knows how to take these really deep concepts and bring them down to a place where people can just hear it and understand it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really the one to kind of lead you to my next question. I want you to think about or ask you about the what can people like the up and coming apologists or even people that don't have PhDs or have that area of focus. I mean, I take the training and the study that I've done in seminary and outside of seminary, but I'm not a scholar or expert on any area specifically, but what would you say that what kind of advice would you give to your students or to people that are not necessarily going into the influence sphere or that want to get their voice out there, that want to study apologetics and utilize what do you think the best strategy is for the average person that doesn't have a PhD behind them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that, again, this is what I said earlier on, there's a place for everyone in this. I think a lot of is it Ruslan? Is that how you say
Ruslan.
it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I find interesting about him? Not so much his commentary, but he comes up with really interesting things, right? He's kind of moving the needle. And what you need are people who can move the needle. Now, I'm not saying he gets, he's a very informed Christian, and he's doing a lot of really good stuff. But what I find most intriguing is that he's able to find those little hot spots, or the pulse of culture and what's going on in these venues, and really kind of bring them to light. I love that kind of thing. I think that's important, and what then it kind of furthers the conversation, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's super important. Let's think of another one. Melissa, is it Melissa Dahlry?
Is that the which one did she? Is it either the girl that came from New Age, or is that the?
That's her. Yeah,
Okay.
Lisa. Is it Childers? Lisa Childers?
Yeah, she was.
that's
She came from. That's
Zoe
right.
Girl. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I think the stuff they're doing is great. What I really liked about Melissa, she gave me some comic relief. I would love to, like, she would have some of these little shorts, where she would do these little skits. And I'm thinking, this is great. This is good, because she's dispelling some of those misconceptions that people have about Christianity. And I really love that, because it was kind of fun. It was fun to watch. And again, I think that there's a place for that kind of thing. And she is, she's growing also in her understanding of things. And I really, I enjoy watching and getting on her channel every once in a while. I watched a few of Lisa Childers when she talked about things like, witchcraft and what's the popular thing everybody did? The numbers thing.
Manifesting.
Oh no, you're talking about the Enneagram.
Yeah, the Enneagram. I forgot the name of that, but the Enneagram,
Yeah.
like that kind of stuff is good, because I think they're exposing some of those issues. And again, I think there's a place for all of this, and we're all growing in our relationship with the Lord. And so, I have to be, I always have to check myself, because, I have to remember where I was, and where I've come. I have to look back at the grace that God has given to me to take all this training and to put me in a place where I can study. Not everybody has that.
Yep.
A lot of people are just like, they're doing the 9 to 5, and they're coming home. They have wife and kids, and then they're like really hitting any other kind of study they can do, or maybe early in the morning. And you know what? They're doing what they can, and I think that's all important, and it's good. I mean, they're developing themselves.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I completely agree with that. I think the thing that so many people lose sight on, Christians especially, I don't even want to say lose sight. I think it's just our big problem is like, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback, to pick things apart, and like Christians who are into, a lot of the people consuming Christian content, especially people who have an intellectual interest in growing and developing, it's sparring, and it's unfortunately, it's a lot of times it's a one-sided spar, and it's a good thing. It's right. This is a professor, right? That one kid, and I'm probably saying this because I was that guy, not in your class, but in other classes. And if any other faculty hear this, they'll already know what I'm about to say. But like, picking fights with a professor is not saying I'm smarter than you. It's like, I need you to push back and hit me so that I know what I've understood. I need to see what the limits of my understanding are. And that's healthy when there's a good relationship. I think what I see a lot of times in the content side of Christian content, and, to be honest, I mean, we've been doing this about a year now, and, we're learning that in the comment section of our own videos and even in creating this channel. And it's, especially when you're in the commentary business, which is, a lot of what we're doing, which is, we're looking at what's going on in popular culture and within Christianity, and then we're providing, if effectively, like a conversation between mature Christians, pastors, theologically educated individuals, for people to listen in on who may not have that in their life, right? And but in a lot of other spheres, and in these Facebook groups, it's so easy to be like, oh, he got that wrong, or hey, he got that, and to kind of tear down people because it's like, oh, I don't like Ruslan, you need to listen to this guy. He's more theologically trained. His theology fits
Mm-hmm.
my bill. But you said something that I think is so important, which it like you making these categorical differences, which is like, hey, this is culture. Like these channels and these creators, this is in some ways it's art, right? They're creating something, and art is downstream of, is the driver of culture, and it's downstream from worldview, and so, they're going to be doing different things. They're going to be advancing the interest in subjects, like the idea that, we're seeing serious soteriological or like discussions about salvation and like the Holy Spirit and what's going on in transformation in a popular sphere. Like when I'm looking in a comment section of a Russell Brand video and I'm seeing discussions on what constitutes salvation, or in a Jordan Peterson video, like that's happening at a mainstream level. You want to talk about moving the needle? Like, that means they're on our side. Like that's so encouraging to me. And so like when I feel that inclination to kind of be like, ugh, that's heresy, then I'm also like, okay, however, they're being exposed to it, right? I think that's awesome. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think as far as some advice I would give, there are some things I would say to young apologists. Be careful. Don't speak on things that you really don't know about.
Well, too late for us.
We blame your employer.
Everybody has opinions, right?
That's exactly it.
But be careful. Stay in your lane. And that was something that I was really impressed with Wes Huff as well. He's like, I could speak to this a little bit, but I have friends over here who are way better at this than me. Here's what they've said. So stay in your lane. If you don't know, then find friends who can help you with that, right? I thought that was good, I think we need to be careful and cautious and wise in the words that we say. And sometimes we have to go back and, not revise, but, recant some of the things we've said, right? Or tell people, hey, I messed this up. And I think that was great that he did that. But staying in your lane as well. If you're really good in one area, well, focus on that. And you can say, here are my thoughts on this, but, check out this source here. I think that's a good way to go forward. So the other thing I would say to young apologists is don't stop learning. Keep growing, and keep working out your ideas, and I think that's all important. And my final piece of advice would be this: we're called to have, or as a part of our spiritual DNA, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those are hard.
Yeah.
But as we engage with other people, that should be a part of who we are. And sometimes we need to step back and check ourselves. Do we have that as part of our spiritual DNA? Do we love our neighbor? Are we being kind and gracious? Am I having self-control when we're having a conversation? Those are hard fruit to have, but they're supposed to be a part of who we are. And I would say that we should have that as part of our apologetic ministry as well.
Quick question on that note, especially on that. How effective, or with that in mind, right? Because this is a balance, and I struggle with this as a pastor sometimes. Poking fun and digging, like throwing jabs at, what we consider, what we believe is, bad theology or bad things in good faith. But do you think there's a place for that?
Yeah, I
maybe more comedic.
Yeah, I think there is a place for that, and I will suggest Melissa to you, because what she was seeing as a problem in the church, she wasn't pointing out specific people, but she was pointing out the specific teachings.
Behavior.
That was, and so she was able to do it in a very whimsical, fun way, but also really got the point across, I think. And I think that kind of thing could be very helpful. Use comedy, use poking fun of things. But I think anytime we're going in critical of a person, we do need to be careful in that.
Right.
I think even like with like the whole Billy Carson
I was going to say that. Yeah.
I believe that he truly believes a lot of what he says, and I think Wes, the way he responded to Billy in the debate was very, hey, let me ask a clarifying question, right? And so on, and then I think also Wes was very good at like saying, look, well, you say this, and what's your methodology for showing the truth of truth claim, or showing the truthfulness of these claims that you're making? And he's like, well, I've seen it with my own eyes, and I think, I've seen a lot of things with my own eyes, but it doesn't mean it's going to convince you,
right.
And I think that's where the public evidence, we could say that I've seen things and I've seen the documents. But if it's one individual, it's really hard to, substantiate those claims. And I think that's kind of what Wes was going after with him on that.
Yeah.
Looking at you, Joseph Smith.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry. Speaking of poking fun.
So one of the things that I think I wanted to ask you, like, what, as a professor, Liberty University has, I think, a great apologetics program. I think that there's a lot of really good stuff there. Eat your heart out, Biola.
That's right.
I think that there's some great, great professors, and there's great curriculum there. But what have you seen in a university, an academic setting? Have you seen apologetics be something that people are interested in or excited about, or are you seeing, more so like, oh, I just, I'm going to get my MDiv to, become a pastor, or and the MDiv in general? Because generally the standard used to be where, you become a pastor, you get an MDiv. And now that's not necessarily the case, right?
The devaluation
but at the same time,
let's talk about that.
Right, I know. At the same time, people like me, where I never had the intention of becoming a pastor, but I wanted to get an MDiv because I was hungry and thirsty for understanding the things of theology and the things of the study of God as I focus on apologetics to do stuff like this. And so the MDiv is not necessarily just a degree where it's like, oh, let's become a pastor, but there's so much more there from apologetics. So I guess the questions are, what is the feeling around apologetics? Is it coming back or not? And then also, just as the the MDiv, or just the master of theology or apologetics, can you speak to that? Like, what the benefit is? Maybe plug for Liberty a little bit.
So if you want to come to study, come to Liberty, and you can study with me personally. Okay?
That's right.
No, thinking about apologetics, it's kind of interesting because I think it was really hot, like maybe 10 years ago, and I see that at this point it's not quite as hot as it was. But what I find with the students who come to study apologetics, they generally want to learn apologetics, and so I see a big difference in students generally who want to study apologetics, and their desire, and just how well they do in the class. Now, we have a lot of students who take apologetics and they do well in the class. But my point is, those who really want to study apologetics, man, they're just like all about it, and they can't wait to take the next class and so on. And so that's one of the things I see generally with students who want to do apologetics. And a lot of times what's fueling that is maybe they've wrestled with their own doubt. Like, hey, I've had doubt in this area, And I want to, I went on this search to find out the answers to the questions I had, and I landed on apologetics, and now this is what I want to do. And so I do find that is quite often something that I see. I find a lot of students who generally are interested in apologetics, but also want to do other things. So not just seminary students, but we also have sometimes you'll have undergrad students who are in nursing, but they'll do like a minor in apologetics because they want to go deeper. And so their degree allows them to do that. And so,
and what other university can you do that?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Nursing with a minor in apologetics. Liberty.
Exactly.
Come on, most exciting university.
That's right. Well, I've heard different, and one of these days I'm just apply for the theology and apologetics PhD just so I could take those intensives. I've heard lots of really good things, and in fact I've heard wonderful stories about with when Dr. Gary Habermas does his like intensives. There's so much reading and everything, but one of the best part of it is engaging, and he's like, prove me wrong. Come on, give me your best stuff. Give me your best stuff. Like, really, honestly? And he'll just poke holes and everything. And speaking of what you were talking about, Josh, is like arguing with the professor and like having that environment, right? Yeah. And he's like, you want to be a PhD? Come on. Yeah. What do you got?
Dr. King, is that what is that, an admonition, a statement of faith? What are you doing up there? Like, say something. Right. Like, man. No, you're right. But, it's so funny you say that, too. But, like, that's so important. The authenticity wins. Period.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
I work I'm a chaplain in the Army. I'm sitting down with 18 to 25-year-old killers, and they don't have time. And people who grew up post church, post religion, they don't care about my credentials. They don't care about any of that. What they can see is when they sit down across from a person. How much time you put
into all those papers?
Yeah, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Right. What they care about is, and this translates, I've found this to be true entirely. You want to find magic. You find the thing that a person cares about and get them talking about it. And that is where you see people come to life. And so, as a professor, I'm sure you see this, just like even as a pastor or anywhere else. I can tell if you're in, like, if this strikes a chord in your soul,
right?
And like, I think that's that's what I see with this West thing, and maybe hopefully apologetics is about to get a lot hotter because people didn't even know what that word meant, and now however many million people have watched that episode are like, a Christian, a what, a who? Like, you can get a master's degree in that? Like, that's real?
You can get a master's degree in apologizing?
You're
I don't
welcome.
Understand.
You're welcome. You know what I'm saying? So, like, I would say, you said it, and I love it, and I think it's like a defining theme for kind of even this conversation is like, the best apologists are the people who are really passionate and good about whatever that thing is that they have cultivated, because hey, guess what, all roads lead to God. So like, music as apologetics, like, this is one of the things, and if you are younger and you're a college age person and you're listening to this episode, like, look, I did 2 degrees at Liberty. I have 8 years on that campus. I'm one of Jerry's kids. Like, I there's no way on earth, like, there's no other place that I know where when you go sit in a music class or a biology class or a philosophy class or an English literature class, that you are like, you're going to push to the level of, bachelor's or even master's degrees, that you're not going to run into God in whatever field it is you're studying.
Right.
You're not going to get that anywhere else, in my opinion. Or maybe you will. But my point is like, if you push, like, I think that's what's so amazing is that, like, and you brought it up, sir, too, like, these different creators who have these different lanes, like, that's the cool thing. If you push to the end of a subject, you're going to land at God.
Yeah.
It's unavoidable.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, one of the things that we see is that you hear in Christian colleges and universities, but a lot of people don't think outside of the realm of Christian college and university, is that all truth is God's truth. So if
That's
there's
right.
truth to be found in the world, ultimately
Right.
God is behind it, right? And so you think about truth that's found in general revelation, and all of these different things like music and art can point to beauty and goodness and truth, and ultimately point to God, I think. There's a book that was put out by Jerry Walls and Trent Dowry on 24 or so arguments for God, which they
Oh
took
yeah,
from Flanagan.
from
Flanagan's,
Flanagan. Yeah,
yeah,
Alvin
his
Flanagan. I was like,
lecture
yeah,
on
here's
that.
some things. Yeah,
And
that's
you'll see
great.
some like arguments from mathematics. You'll see arguments from
Yep.
color. I mean, there are all
Yeah.
kinds of different arguments out there that people are just not aware of, but it's quite brilliant when you start looking at some of these ideas. And this is why you have in the Greek philosophy Plato and others that are fascinated with the transcendent. So for Christians, we would say, well, God is the ground for all goodness, beauty, and so on. And even these like Platonic abstract forms that you normally think of, well, God
Sure.
is also, I mean, these are outside of God, but he is the ground for those as well. So,
Yeah,
So
that's good.
two questions to follow up on that, because so one is apologetics part, should that belong in the philosophy department or should it belong in the theology department? Secondly, also like where does natural theology kind of come into play on this? And I think actually you've done a book most recently on some
yeah.
natural theology, and then also on the moral argument with Dr. Baggett. So but yeah, like in regards to natural theology, where does that kind of play a role?
Yeah, so here's my take on apologetics. Some people will disagree with me on this, but I see it as primarily as an applied discipline. I think it is applied in the sense that what you're doing is going out and engaging with others. Be ready to give a defense for the hope that's within you. Apologia, that's what it is. It's a defense, right? But having said that, it's more than just applied. I mean, like any discipline that you have, there's got to be the content, there's got to be the philosophy behind it, and so forth. I mean, you think about like education. Well, you can have all kinds of different models of how to educate students, but eventually you got to get to those meta issues. That's why you have a philosophy of education, or history, a philosophy of history, and so on. Well, philosophy functions as a second order discipline. As J.P. Moreland points out, it functions in this second order way that it takes all these first order disciplines and it critiques them, right? Philosophy, and it critiques itself, right? And so philosophy is one of those disciplines that helps us to think about our own disciplines and critiques our disciplines, and helps us to look at the presuppositions that might be behind the way we're thinking about things, or and so on. So in that sense, you can't do philosophy. I mean, I don't think you could do apologetics without some philosophical examination.
Well,
and
there has to be some sort of foundation, right?
Mhm.
An understanding of thought process and logic, and yeah.
Right. I mean, even when you begin thinking about, like, if you're doing historical apologetics, well, you've got those meta issues that you have to work through.
Right.
So I wouldn't necessarily put it under a philosophy category as a branch of philosophy. I think it's an applied area of Christian theology. And so just as you can't do apologetics without some philosophy, I would say you can't do good apologetics without having a solid grounding in theology. So theology is going to be, I mean, you have to know something about the thing that you're defending, right? Otherwise, why are you defending it, right? So you have to know not only why you believe what you believe, but what is it that you believe, right? And so both of those two things are needed. And so I always tell my students that good apologetics requires good theology. And so that's how I would see it, because what you're defending is the truthfulness of the Christian faith. Now, let me get one more thing in with the natural theology. I would say that natural theology is a subset of theology as well, but there is elements where it corresponds with philosophy of religion. So it's kind of, you could put it in either camp, because I think you don't have to be a Christian to do natural theology. You could be a Muslim or you could be Jewish or you could belong to a Hinduism or whatever, and do
really
natural
quick,
theology.
For our audience, can you just quickly, briefly, like define what natural theology is? Because I think a lot of people are like that. I thought I knew what that was, but yeah,
both.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay.
Briefly define that
for our audience's benefit.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Philosophy of religion is basically kind of like what we were saying with philosophy of education. It's kind of that looking at religion and developing our ideas and concepts of God and religion in general. So it's again looking at some of the meta issues that's related to study of religion, and so that's where you have the crossover with natural theology. Natural theology is basically just trying to discern whether or not there is such a being as God, and trying to understand this existence apart from the use of sacred revelation.
So,
right?
For clarification, just for the sake of the conversation, for them to understand, but what we're talking about when we talk about natural revelation, like specific, or general and specific revelation, the idea of like, hey, can we build what we have received in specific revelation, i.e. what the Bible tells us about God, which is kind of like the answers to the test, right? Can we look around us and build that from the thought, like fundamental framework, all the way up to these complicated concepts? And then the philosophy of religion is like where those two things are moving from like both sides of the coin to like touch each other. Is that a fair? Is that a fair? And when we say meta concepts, you're referring to like the supernatural aspects, the non like fully ascertained, like observable, testable aspects of Christianity. Is that a like generic enough? Or is there a better way to phrase that, you think?
Yeah, let me see if I can cash this out a little bit better.
Please, by all means.
I started with natural theology instead of philosophy of religion. Let me start with, I like the point that you brought up about special revelation and general revelation. So within Christian theology, we generally hold to two types of revelation. You have special revelation, which is where God reveals things to us in a special way, hence the name for special revelation, whether that's through like miracles or dreams, God's mighty works throughout history, also through the Bible, God's written text, as well as the incarnation.
Power of Christ unto salvation. Yeah.
Yeah. So you look, and these are all ways in which God has revealed himself to humanity in a special kind of way. General revelation has to do with revelation that's based, or maybe another way to put it, natural revelation, is the way in which God has revealed himself through nature. And this is where you see, like in Romans 1, that God has made himself known. And he goes on to say, no one's without excuse, and so on. His eternal attributes, you can be seen through creation. Well, how? Well, he's made it known to all of us in that sense. And so that's what Paul says there. And so natural revelation has to do with the ways in which God has revealed himself through the natural world. And so when we think about these two different forms of revelation, natural revelation is kind of where we get the idea of natural theology. And so they're interrelated, because when we do natural theology, we're trying to build arguments for the existence of God apart from the use, or let me rephrase that a little bit. Yeah, apart from the authority of special revelation, right? So, for example, you might take the cosmological argument or the ontological argument or the teleological design argument, and combine that with, like, say, the anthropic principle. So there are a variety of different ways in which you can do natural theology. The 24 and so arguments for God book I was telling you about, a lot of that, basically, it's just natural theology. William Lane Craig, J.P. Moreland put out this really cool book with Blackwell on natural theology, and it's like maybe, I think, 8 chapters, and it's like huge. It's massive. It's like each chapter is like 100 pages or something. It's pretty crazy.
Well, you get those two guys and like write a book together. It's like, okay, do you know how long William Lane Craig has been working on his philosophical systematic theology book? Come on.
That's right. Yeah. So you had that, but when I said that you can't use scripture, I wanted to clarify that because N.T. Wright just recently wrote a book on this topic, eschatology and history and eschatology, I think is what it's called. And in that, he argues, hey, what I'm doing as a historian is a form of natural theology because he's building a case for
that's
Christ,
right.
Yes.
Or the resurrection, and he's using history, but in doing history, he's also using
scripture,
the biblical text. That's right.
Yes.
But he's not seeing it as, the same way that like, a thorough, full-on acceptance of this as authoritative, inerrant, inspired, and so on. But he's using it as a historical text and historical source. And it's the same kind of thing we see with like Gary Habermas and Michael Kona. And so I would say all of what they're doing in historical apologetics, in a sense, is a form of natural theology.
Right.
And so that's really what natural theology is.
Yeah.
Now, philosophy of religion, on the other hand, it does not, it's looking at the whole gambit of world religions and so on, whether or not there is such a being as God. So it's going to engage in some of the same things that natural theology does, arguments for the existence of God. But it'll go beyond those kinds of things. Like, is there such thing as free will? Do human beings have that? Determinism versus, free will and all of that. So that gets into some of the things that philosophy of religion will look at.
I love the thing you just said, though, about we even talking about how when we're looking at even the Bible as part of natural theology. But really, I think this is important, too, because I don't think people think about this when they think about Christianity, that, like, we have to dance between these notions of, like, we accept the premise in faith, however we got there, through natural, theology or whatever, that, hey, that the Bible is the Word of God, right? And so, obviously the principal thing we come across 90% of the time in apologetics is like, well, because the Bible says so, like it's a logical fallacy, like it's an argument, like from authority, appeal to authority, or or whatever. But it's and that's what we're getting at, is that no, the Bible as historical documents, let's take the authority out of it and just assess it on what it is naturally, right? Like what is it as a thing, and how did we come about it, not what we ascribe to it, however justified that may be. But I think that's so powerful, because and I'm sure you please talk about this as well, but I think that's one of the most compelling arguments for Christianity, is that we have the answer to the test. And what I wish the lost understood is how much effort and time we take into not using it just to show you that it's right. Like we are ignoring that we know the answer and working backwards from the premise, and it's still coming up aces. Like, that's not a small thing,
One of the more powerful,
the subject matter so broad anyway. Go ahead, Josh.
Right. And one of the more powerful things that Joe Rogan came away with was the Isaiah scroll, and what Wes Huff said about the Isaiah scroll. And now, granted, word for word identical, you could say that, but it's like, okay, maybe
0.05,
right? Or in the grand scheme of things, it's the same spirit of like, it's pretty much. And then there's all these other, and I think Dr. Ortland made a good example of like, there's all these others. It's not just the great Isaiah scroll, but there's other Isaiah fragments in the Dead Sea Scrolls that do fill in some of the gaps that people have criticisms on that. But even like Joe Rogan had Brian Callum on just the other day, and like 2 hours into their conversation, he brings up Wes Huff. And this is what Joe Rogan does, is he's got this good circle of friends and commentators and experts that he pulls on when somebody comes on the show and says, oh, the Bible is it's completely bunk, right? And he's like, well, I had Wes Huff on. He seemed to think differently. And then, that type of thing. So Wes Huff came up and he's like, what still is amazing to me, what he said, what Wes Huff said is about how the Isaiah scroll was like 1,000 years later, was word for word. And that being a form of natural theology and the evidence to say, man, maybe there's something to it, At the same time where, he had Stephen Meyer on, and he kept saying to Stephen Meyer, he's like, man, I've had scientists, I've had chemists, I've had biologists, I've had every kind of mathematician on here, and they all, when it comes to the creation of the world and the beginning of the world, they all want me to believe one miracle. They just need one miracle of the of creation ex nihilo, right? And so and then they can explain everything, but I have to accept that one miracle.
Dude,
so yeah.
That's Josh, that's like, this is my number one. It's so funny you say that, because this is the one that gets so many people that I deal with, is like, listen to me, hierarchy of knowledge, like this whole idea of like not all assumptions are equal. Like, if you ask me to suspend my disbelief on young earth, new earth, okay, cool, right? But like the premise that the atheist asks me, or even the Darwinian evolution asks me, is like, you want me to suspend my disbelief on the laws of thermodynamics, the fundamental, most testable, provable thing in science, and you want me to say there's matter that's moving and it's organized, but you don't want me to make the logical conclusion that something had the ability to move it and moved it, and that someone also organized it, which is like the first order like assumption that you want me to suspend my disbelief on that? Like, and you think I'm asking a lot? Like, that just I can't wrap my brain around it. Anyway.
Well, we've covered a lot, and just wanted to. Was there anything else that you wanted to kind of, that about the conversation that you wanted to kind of touch on before we let you plug your books and have you on again in the next couple of weeks, right? Anything that points that we've made, or that you want to make?
Hey, it was a fun discussion. I really enjoyed it. I do think, again, like I said, there's a place for everyone in this. I've seen a lot of criticism of people who are doing popular apologetics, and I think as Christians we need to be a little bit more charitable with some of these. So for those who are, a little bit more, I guess, critically thinking, let's be a little bit more charitable and see where these people, remember where you came from, and try to coach them instead of just being critical, right? Let's put out an olive branch and try to have conversations to help them along the way so that they can grow. Those who are younger apologists who are just getting into it, make sure to just check yourself. Don't get out of your lane. Don't try to state things you don't know anything about. And keep studying. Keep working through it. And I think that would be my biggest takeaway, or at least take my advice for them to take away. And so, yeah.
Well, and as we close out, I think that's a great point. Keep studying. I think, Josh, you could probably also attest for this, but the body of knowledge that I learned in seminary was how to find the answers and how to do good research. And how to think. But the majority of the stuff that I know now are stuff that is continued education by reading books like Natural Theology 5 Views by the house, all these wonderful, and it's edited by this by Ronnie Campbell, and then also this other book, a Personal God in a Good World by
links in the description. No affiliation at the moment,
and Dr. David
but
Baggett.
We're open to it. We're open to it.
Really good stuff. So a lot of really good stuff out there.
You're being very generous, Josh. Listen, I'm going to put it out to you. Listen to me. If you feel the call on your life, right, to enter into ministry, there's no other place that you can be more prepared than Liberty University or Liberty Baptist Theological Seminary. All right? A seminary, for those of you who don't know, is different than a school of divinity. All right? Like, this is where you go to be prepared for the work, right? The practical application to your
That's
point,
right.
Dr. Campbell. That's what we're
If
about.
you're looking for a sign,
right.
this is your
That's
sign.
right. Right.
Yeah.
If you want to be
So
like
where can-
us, all right? Yeah. Right? If you want to be like us, go get yourself an education, a proper education at the world's most exciting university, Liberty University.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where can people find you, Dr. Campbell? What are some of the things that where people can buy your books? And we'll grab some links from you that we can put in our description.
Yeah, so my books, the two you mentioned there, all of them can be found on Amazon. They can be found. I don't have like links or anything. I'm sorry.
We'll get them for you. Don't worry.
I do have an Amazon authors page, so you can get them on Amazon. You can find them on Barnes and Noble. They're in all the major booksellers as well as in places like Walmart and Target.
There you go.
So there you go. I also have a couple other books out there, but the other one I'll plug two more. Worldviews and the Problem of Evil, which was based on my doctoral research. I'll just say a little bit about that. That book basically just examines 4 different worldviews and their response to evil. How do you make sense of evil in the world? And what I argue for is theism makes the best sense of evil and also explains it, but then I move on to Christian deism. The other book is 4 views on whether Jews, Christians, and Muslims worship the same God, and it's quite interesting. It was a Zondervan, one of the Zondervan counterpoints, which one of my colleagues at Liberty, Chris Nanikin, and I put together.
Great.
And, we had a slew of scholars. John Cobb was one of the scholars in there. We had Jill McDermott, Frank Beckwith, and Jerry Walls, and then so it's really good work. And so what you think that's an easy question, but when you begin getting involved in that,
well, it's good to be able to answer that question. Because that's the general question that people ask. Like, well, don't we all just worship the same God? Don't we're a Muslim or in Judaism, right? Exactly, exactly. We need to be able to answer.
Hey,
that.
we're gonna do an episode on that. Dr. Yonikin, one of my favorite, intensives I took. That man, he pulled up Ravi Zacharias. I know it's different than at the time. It's really cool. He pulled up Ravi. He got Ravi on the phone like in the middle of the intensive. I'll never forget that. Anyway, Dr. Yonikin's great. Love him to death. We should do an episode on that specific topic. I think that would be
Do we worship the same God?
Yeah,
that would be cool. Maybe we'll have to have you on.
I'd love to. It'd be great. And like I said, it's more complicated than people really make it out to be.
I can't imagine.
Yeah,
that'd be great. Well, sir, thanks
awesome.
for coming on. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank
John.
you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right, we'll do this again. So if you haven't already, like and subscribe if you hung out this long. Thank you for watching, and go look at a nice degree at Liberty University. We'll have another episode soon.
We'll see you next week.
All you have 20 years of dumpster fires, purple hair, people who don't know which bathroom to go into. Get off my lawn.